How do you like your Scotch and water? Well, not too long ago, drinking either the Scotch or the water could kill you. But due to a certain king of England who liked to pillage churches and kill his wives, and 2 pioneering Victoria-era medical practitioners, this would all change. Find out more on this episode of Happy Hour History.
I'll drink to that.
Scotch and water. A truly delightful combination, provided the Scotch and the water are both of the highest quality. Now, this hasn't always been the case. While the quality of Scotch has been evolving for about 500 years, what you may not realize is, until fairly recently, water was not to be trusted. Now, I prefer my Scotch neat, but for some, adding a bit of water to the Scotch acts favorably on their palates, bringing a richer flavor to the Scotch. We'll learn more in our 2 Happy Hour segments. The first with Bartender Cameron George. Cameron is going to mix us a Scotch-based cocktail called the Penicillin. And as a special bonus, we'll have Scotch expert Dan Crowell give us some additional insights into this complex and historically significant spirit. The Penicillin cocktail is appropriate because back when Scotch was first invented, it was considered medicine. It was medieval nuns and monks who were the dispensers of that early medical care, based mostly around herbology. Those monks were also the practitioners of something else, the distilling of Scotch. Back then, they called it aqua vitae, Latin for the water of life. And it was considered a panacea for whatever ailed you, and prescribed for the plague, colic, smallpox, and the prolongation of life. I'll drink to that. In moderation, of course. Before we go further, I need to state that there is more than a wee bit of competition between the Scots and the Irish on who invented whiskey first. However, the earliest written account of whiskey production comes from a Scottish tax record from the 1490s, where a monk named John Core produced the equivalent of 1,500 bottles. Damn. So this one goes to the Scots for now.
Oh, shite.
As far as we can tell, European monasteries obtained distilling technology through trade with Islam. Alcohol distilling was first developed by Islamic alchemists sometime around the 8th century. While Europe had devolved into barbarism, Islamic civilization flourished, making great strides in the arts, sciences, and exploration. But because Islamic law prohibited drinking, booze didn't develop commercially there. Over time, the monks got pretty good at this distilling business, and people really enjoyed imbibing this stuff. However, if you ventured beyond the confines of the monastery looking to catch a Scotch whiskey buzz, you would better be careful. Elsewhere, distilling was done with more primitive equipment and methods that were a bit slapdash. So oftentimes, downing the water of life could get you dead. You see, not all of the liquid that comes out of your still is drinkable. That first bit that comes out is called the heads, and it's poisonous. But distillation methods throughout Greater Britain were about to improve dramatically, thanks to something that King Henry VIII did. He's the one with the 6 wives. Spoiler alert, only 3 of them survived the experience. In 1536, Henry made the monks homeless. Why he did that had to do with an epic, history-changing breakup. You see, in order for Henry to have all those wives, he first had to divorce wife number 1, Catherine of Aragon. You see, Catherine was a gifted polymath and considered by many scholars to be smarter than Henry, and... I see where this is going. They had been married for over 20 years, and by many accounts it was a good partnership. But Catherine had just turned 40 and had still not borne Henry a son and proper heir. This was not because of her lack of trying. She was pregnant 7 times, with only 1 child surviving to adulthood. Her daughter, Mary Tudor, who would become Queen Mary, and the first woman to rule England and also have a drink named after her. More about that in a future episode. But Catherine's sufferings and loyalty didn't matter, because Henry was on his way to becoming the poster child for toxic masculinity. He was smitten with the younger Anne Boleyn, who was also a brilliant and highly educated woman of her time. As Henry lusted after her, Anne wisely insisted that he marry her before she would boff him. That meant Henry would have to divorce Catherine, and, well, that was not an easy thing to do back then. At that time in Western Europe, there was one world religion, and it was Catholic. The Pope in Rome was very much in charge of what the kings did when it came to interpreting the will of God, marriage being one of those things. So when Henry floated the idea of ending his marriage to his devoted Catholic wife, Pope Clement VII said,
"No effing way."
He didn't really say effing. To which Henry replied,
"Okay, fine. I'm going to start my own religion. I'm going to call it the Church of Me."
Perhaps the Church of England would be better, sire.
So King Henry jumped headlong into the growing Protestant Reformation movement started by Martin Luther. Ironically, he had vigorously opposed Luther just a few years earlier. Henry's act of lusty rebellion was historically significant because it propelled Europe on the path to greater individual freedom. That's because when you start questioning the authority of the Pope, God's true representative on earth, where does it end? I mean, someday, about 250 years later, a group of radical colonists might rebel against their king, even declaring all men are created equal. So Henry's own church gave him the thumbs up to Catherine's humiliating annulment. As you may have guessed, because 6 wives, his marriage to Anne Boleyn was not a storybook romance. In just a few years, Henry became disenchanted because Anne also failed to bear him a son. Following a familiar pattern, he became infatuated with another woman,
Hello.
Jane Seymour. And after creating false charges against Anne Boleyn, it was off with her head.
Sorry, love.
Ironically, although not the male heir he desired, Anne's daughter would become Queen Elizabeth I and reign over a golden age for England. Now back to the homeless monks.
'Tis about damn time.
As part of Henry's reformations, he enacted the dissolution of the monasteries. This was essentially a major land grab that transferred the wealth of hundreds of Catholic properties into Henry's coffers. It has been called possibly the greatest act of vandalism in English history because thousands of priceless religious artworks were destroyed. In addition, the dissolution also heavily impacted poor people for whom the monasteries had provided relief services.
Ooh, yum.
Oh, bloody hell.
Many monks were literally tossed into whatever streets there were and had to put whatever skills they had to commercial use. Some skills proved more lucrative than others. One of those lucrative skills was, you guessed it, distilling. So they moved out into the world and helped turn distilling from an arcane art into a solid commercial enterprise. Over the next several hundred years, the distillation of Scotch and Irish malt whiskey slowly and steadily improved. Then, in the early 1800s, Great Britain found itself at the epicenter of a global transformative event, the Industrial Revolution. In 1831, machine-scale production hit the Scotch whiskey world with the invention of the patent column-type still by Aeneas Coffey, who was, ironically, an Irishman. Coffey's invention had been rejected by the big Irish distillers, who preferred using old-school pot stills to make their malted barley whiskey. They would watch with envy as Scotch became the dominant whiskey in markets around the world.
Not again.
Coffey's column still was the perfect industrial-era machine. It could run day and night, produced a uniform product, and its owners would save big bucks in lower fuel costs. The column still created a smoother but less flavorful Scotch, using grains as opposed to malted barley. So enterprising Scots decided to blend malted whiskey from pot stills into the mix, thus improving the flavor, creating increasingly popular blended whiskeys. As the Industrial Revolution increased wealth and trade around the world, the growing middle classes, with some extra cash on their hands, got their Scotch whiskey on. Then, an act of nature in the 1880s added to Scotch's growing popularity. A biological catastrophe caused by the phylloxera beetle infestation devastated French vineyards. Wine and brandy virtually disappeared from commercial markets, and Scotch whiskey soon became the spirit of choice. Okay, problem solved, and the world goes on to enjoy Scotch and water forever. Except for one thing. Even though now the Scotch wouldn't kill you, the water might. We take it for granted, at least in developed countries, that when you turn on the tap, pure, clean drinking water comes out. But this is a very new historical condition. During most of the last several hundred years, the city and town water that you would drink often looked like this and smelled horrible, and it was likely to sicken or kill you. And why was that? Well, mainly because humans are gross. In the newly emerging towns and cities from the 1500s onward, there was no such thing as sanitation. Sewers, if they existed, were rudimentary. Flush toilets, they'd not been invented yet. So what would happen to all that bodily waste that collected in the chamber pots during the night?
God damn it.
It all rolled downhill and into the drinking water supply. Then density became a problem. When King Henry ruled London in the early 1500s, less than 100,000 people lived there. 300 years later, London's population, like many other cities, had exploded to over 1 million. This was because it was at the center of that exciting new trend in human development, industrialization. 19th century cities were vile. In London, the average life expectancy was only 37. Many London neighborhoods were crammed with people, 40 to a room, and even more living outside, houseless and next to garbage pits, livestock pens, and slaughterhouses. Beneath it all were decades-old overflowing cesspools. Many inhabitants drew their drinking water from the River Thames, that also served as the dumping ground for the city's untreated sewage. So it was no surprise that by the mid-19th century, a series of devastating cholera epidemics swept through the city, killing thousands and bringing London to the brink of social chaos. At the time, people did not yet understand what caused diseases. They had early microscopes, but they didn't make the connection between the weird stuff they saw swimming in the water, many of them potentially lethal organisms, we call them germs, and disease. That's because back in the 1850s, germ theory had not been developed yet. The medical establishment back then thought that epidemics were caused by bad smells, and there were plenty of those to go around. It was called the miasmic theory, and it had been in vogue since ancient times. But pioneering London physician John Snow didn't buy it, so he set out to find the answer, and beer would play a significant role in his investigation.
Sorry, I'll never touch the stuff.
Snow had already innovated Victorian-era medicine by introducing anesthesia to his patients, including Queen Victoria, while she was giving birth.
We heartily approve.
Snow was about to create a brand new field of medical science that would transform our world and save lives for years to come. In 1854, he went out into the filthy and fetid London streets where a cholera epidemic raged and recorded on maps exactly where people died. Then he determined where their water supply came from in an effort to scientifically pinpoint the source of the outbreak. In the process, Snow became one of the world's first epidemiologists. Through his research, he discovered that one particular water pump on Broad Street in Soho seemed to be a likely source of the outbreak. Over a 3-day period, 127 people, rich and poor alike, had died from drinking water from that pump. Ironically, it was a pump that had been known for its sweet-tasting water. But something suddenly derailed his investigation. Snow discovered a group of people who worked right next to the fatal Broad Street pump that the cholera had completely bypassed. What was going on? Snow couldn't understand why the 70 workers at the Lion Brewery were somehow immune. This was especially puzzling since health officials believed that drinking alcohol and cholera deaths were somehow linked. Now, before we solve this medical mystery, I want to highlight a brilliant contemporary of Snow's who was onto much the same idea. I bet you've heard her name, Florence Nightingale. But I'll also wager you don't know her full story. Nightingale began her pioneering healthcare career as a nurse at the Barak Army Hospital near Istanbul, Turkey, during the Crimean War. The conditions at that hospital were shameful, with human excrement mixed with blood literally covering the floor. Confirmation bias for the bad smells theory there. Not surprisingly, many soldiers were dying from non-lethal wounds at an alarming rate. Nightingale and her fellow nurses went to work, establishing a new standard of care for patients based around better sanitation, providing clean wound dressing, decent food, and even some focus on mental health to the neglected soldiers. The romanticized image of Florence Nightingale as the lady with the lamp, offering maternal care to soldiers, belies her true genius. Nightingale was a mathematical wizard who, like Snow, kept very detailed records, noting the cause of illnesses and death, and the efficiency of Army medical facilities. She then devised an innovative graphic to depict the vast statistical data that she had gathered. Her coxcomb chart that assessed mortality rates showed that thousands of hospital deaths were entirely preventable if they would simply improve sanitary conditions, which they finally did. Her work revolutionized hospital care. Nightingale would continue to work on healthcare reform, including founding the Nightingale School of Nursing in 1860, providing one of the few professional career options open to 19th century women. Now back to cholera-ravaged London in 1853. Fun times! So, did you figure out the mystery of the cholera-free brewery? Through interviews with the brewery workers, John Snow discovered that the employees enjoyed a fringe benefit: free beer. And because of that, they never felt the need to drink water from the tainted Broad Street pump. To your health. With his research in hand, Snow had the pump shut down, and the cholera epidemic receded. It was later discovered that just a few feet away from the well was a leaking cesspool filled with cholera-infested diaper water.
Yucky.
See, people are gross. In a second investigation, Snow statistically compared how cholera affected two adjoining London neighborhoods. Each got their water from two different privately run companies. One company was following the new water regulations and sourced their water several miles upstream from the city, while the other company ignored the regulations to increase their profits and got their water in the heart of London, right next to where sewage poured into the river. The results were unequivocal. Only 14 people died in the neighborhood supplied by the upstream water, while 286 people died from the sewage-tainted water. That should have settled it. But no, it took yet another cholera outbreak in 1866 when the disease was tracked directly to an East London reservoir for everyone to finally accept that John Snow had been right all along. As you may have noticed, both Snow and Nightingale were early adapters of a form of big data to improve healthcare, and they did it all in their heads back then. Cholera, we now know, is transmitted by a waterborne pathogen. What finally tipped the scales was that germ theory was becoming accepted, thanks to the work of Louis Pasteur, of pasteurization fame, and Joseph Lister, of Listerine fame. As a consequence, large-scale engineering works to improve water supplies and sanitation were taken up in the big cities, and eventually, water in the industrialized world became safer. This worked out well for the growing temperance movement in the US, who wanted men to stop drinking booze and switch to water. Federal regulation of the bacteriological content in our drinking water only began in 1914, and it took until 1974, with the passage of the Safe Drinking Water Act, to ensure that we get safe, clean, pure water every time we pull the tap. Thank goodness we never have to worry about that again. As for John Snow, he is now considered the father of epidemiology. And to honor him, guess what sits on the side of the old Broad Street pump? A pub! I guess that means it's time for happy hour and a wee bit of scotch. I want you to have a drink now. Hey, welcome to Happy Hour. We are here at the fantastic Scotch Lodge in Portland, Oregon, and we are so lucky to have with us the amazing Cameron George, who is a terrific bartender and he knows a thing or two about Scotch. And he's going to show us how to make a Penicillin cocktail that includes two kinds of Scotch. Cameron, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So tell me more about this Scotch and water thing. Is there a reason I should be adding water to my whiskey?
Water and whiskey have an incredible relationship together. It literally makes a third of the recipe. For single malts, you can actually only utilize malted barley, water, and yeast to create a whiskey. Even after the production process, these two things have a relationship that's forever entwined. When you add a little bit of the water to whiskey, sometimes you can absolutely just bring out flavors and aromatics that you never saw before. Then there's the other side of that where you can absolutely shred a whiskey to bits. It's really about knowing the dram you're about to consume.
So Cameron, tell me more about this cocktail. It uses two kinds of scotch.
Yeah, the Penicillin cocktail was created in the early 2000s. It relies heavily on two different styles of whiskey. First and foremost, a Highland whiskey. About 1.5 ounces of Glenmorangie will do perfectly in this cocktail. This is going to be the backbone that gives you light, very soft and fruity aromatics like stone fruits, peaches, nectarines, things like that. We're then also going to be complementing that with an Islay whiskey. Islay whiskeys are known for being very peaty, very strong and robust. About 3/4 ounce of Ardbeg, a delicious single malt from the islands.
So each of these scotches come from a different region in Scotland.
Yeah, the regions are really just there for, context and to allow us to know where these distilleries really sit on a map, right? So the regions would actually be the Highlands, the Lowlands, Speyside, Campbelltown, Islay, and then the surrounding islands as well.
So can you tell me a little bit more about the peated scotches?
The peaty whiskeys really are utilized in cocktails like this to accent the rest of the body of the cocktail. We've chosen Ardbeg this time because it's very light, it's bright, and it's got a very saline and salty aspect to it. Peated whiskeys are actually produced using peat, which is the naturally occurring fuel source for thousands of years on Islay. Islay is this small little island off the southwest coast of Scotland that's been populated for almost 6,000 years. When people started inhabiting Islay, essentially there were not a whole lot of trees for them to be able to use to heat their homes and cook their food. So what they did is they dug down into the terroir, into the earth below their feet, and they discovered that they could light that on fire and actually provide their houses with warmth, cook their food, and then also make their whiskey, most importantly.
So two different scotches from different regions. What else goes into this cocktail?
So we're gonna follow up those strong and robust flavors with a little bit of acidity, lemon juice, fresh squeeze if you have it. 3/4 ounce will do perfectly for this cocktail. Then we're gonna accent that with 3/4 ounce of a honey and ginger syrup as well. Honey and ginger syrup is also homemade, very, very easy. About 6 ounces of honey, 3 ounces of water, 3 ounces of grated ginger, and bring it to a simmer for 45 minutes. Perfect, very simple.
So Cameron, tell me how you got interested in scotch.
I've had an immense love for Scotland since I visited the Shetland Isles when I was 11 years old. Ever since, I've kind of just been enthralled with the intersection of the science of making whiskey, as well as the stories and Gaelic history as well. So to round out the cocktail, we're gonna add a little bit of ice to our shaker tins, then we're gonna shake for dilution. Gotta get it nice and cold. Make sure you put ice into your glass. And fine strain your cocktail to remove any sort of ice chips or unwanted dilution. I'm gonna garnish it with a little bit of lemon and some candied ginger. And just to recap, it's 1.5 ounces of a Highland whiskey. Glenmorangie works wonderfully. 3/4 ounce of an Islay whiskey, Ardbeg 10-year. 3/4 ounce of lemon juice, as well as 3/4 ounce of honey syrup as well. Slanjava, enjoy.
Oh, thank you. That's just what the doctor ordered.
Perfect.
I want to thank you, Cameron, for joining us. I also want to thank our Indiegogo donors for getting us to this point, and our sponsors Ardbeg and Glenmorangie. And remember to think and drink responsibly. Hey, welcome to Happy Hour. We are appropriately at the Scotch Lodge in Portland, Oregon, and I'm here with Dan Crowell, a whiskey expert who knows a thing or two about Scotch, and he's going to share some of his whiskey wisdom with us. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So tell me what we've got going here.
I've selected 3 single malt Scotch whiskies that I think are strong indicators of the important characteristic elements that make Scotch whiskey what it is. Those come from barrel aging, from the passage of time, from the choice of grains, from the fermentation techniques and distillation techniques, and these whiskeys are really solid indicators of those elements, help you understand the category better. The first of them, Glenmorangie Original, sits in a glass of 43 ABV. These are all unpeated whiskeys. There's nothing smoky about them. For those who are new to the category or considering the category, smoky whiskeys can be off-putting at first. They're delicious, absolutely wonderful, but they may not be the place to start. So in this case, Glenmorangie Original is a wide open door to the category.
That's nice.
Fruitiness, a bit of a floral characteristic, fully matured in ex-bourbon oak, so a creamy vanilla toasted coconut characteristic as well. One of the reasons I wanted to start there is because the other 2 whiskeys are based on that fundamental element. They all have Glenmorangie Original in them. They're variations on that theme. This next whiskey, Glenmorangie Quinta Ruban, slightly higher ABV, 46 versus 43. It's seen a secondary maturation period, not in ex-bourbon oak, but in ruby port casks, so fortified red Portuguese wine. You'll see in the color, the flavor, you'll smell the difference, you'll definitely taste the difference. And it's not just because it's a slightly higher proof.
Let's talk about casks and the role that they play in Scotch.
Absolutely. You'll be able to see that difference. The difference in color is entirely derived from the use of a red wine cask, in this case, Portuguese fortified red wine cask. It's not only going to lend differences in flavor and color and aroma, but it's certainly going to change the texture of the whiskey as well. That slightly higher ABV will give a little more creaminess on the palate, and the red wine will deliver not only darker fruit notes, but also some really interesting mid-palate astringency that lends balance to the whiskey as well.
I definitely taste a bit of port in that. That's very nice.
Passage of an extra 4 years has its impact, and with the next whiskey, a passage of another 4 years will have an increased additional impact.
There's obviously a lot of Scotch out there, so tell me more about single malts.
Let's start by defining those 4 terms: single malt Scotch whiskey. Single means that it comes from a single distillery, a single source. Blended Scotch whiskey comes from many distilleries, many sources, so they're blended together. Malt, the only cereal grain used in single malt Scotch whiskey, is malted barley. In blended Scotch, other grains are allowed. Malted barley has to be a part of every Scotch, no matter what the category is. Single malt Scotch whiskey can only use malted barley. Scotch means that it is fermented, distilled, and matured in Scotland. It is spent at least 3 years in an oak container of no more than 700 liters of interior volume, and that came into the bottle at no less than 80 proof or 40 ABV. And then whiskey is a global term, meaning a distillate derived from cereal grains and aged in a barrel.
So tell me a little bit more about column versus pot stills and how that plays a role in the development of Scotch.
Pot distillation happens in batches. There's a little bit more mystery, there's a little more mystique there, there's less control, which is ideal for creating a whiskey that has more character to it. Distillate coming out of a column still, which is a somewhat modern device, that still never stops running. It matures faster, it's appealing to a broader audience. So if you took the iron fist of malted barley whiskey and the velvet glove of grain whiskey and you put them together, you'd have blended Scotch, which is still responsible for over 90% of the category.
So the pot still, with its impurities, are actually imparting more flavor.
Exactly. Maturation in a cask is one important way to take what might be a somewhat harsh impurity or congener and direct it in a beautiful and delicious way over the course of time and interaction with wood.
So this next one has been casked longer, is that correct?
Yes, so the next one is Glenmorangie 18. This is 18 years in cask. That's a long time. 18 trips around the sun builds a lot of texture, character, layering, delicacy into this whiskey. It's bottled at 43 ABV. There is a little bit of sherry oak influence. Oloroso sherry casks play up a part of the cask regimen here. But what we're really looking to produce is immense depth on the palate with surprising delicacy and brightness and freshness in the whiskey.
That's really nice. Really complex. It's very smooth. There's a lot going on there.
Loads of depth, and it just keeps delivering an impact on the palate long after you even swallowed the liquid.
Yeah, no, I'm still feeling it.
Right,
It's like,
exactly.
Yeah. So Dan, I think for some people, Scotch can be a little bit intimidating. What's a good way for people to get started?
If I was looking into the category, I would probably search my neighborhood or general area for a whiskey bar that had a decent selection behind the bar. and a staff that was welcoming and knowledgeable enough to help guide my experience in the category. These places exist not just as entertainment venues, but also as tasting rooms for categories that you're not yet familiar with. So that's exactly how I'd start.
So tell me why you think people should give Scotch a try.
One of the things that I like to point out about drinking Scotch whiskey is that there's no wrong way to do it. It's fully empowering from day one. When you look at a bottle of Scotch whiskey, what you know is that the people that made that learned that process from previous generations, and they learned it from previous generations before them. This has been happening in Scotland in an official capacity since 1494. So you have a tremendous amount of not only history and time that's passed, but passed down knowledge, know-how, wisdom, and artwork. These are liquid arts, just like music is a nonverbal form of artistic communication. The visual arts, these are the liquid arts, and these are people trying to communicate their passion, their history, their culture, their struggles to you in real time in an effort not only to enhance your knowledge of where they're from, but enhance the quality of your life at the same time.
Dan, thank you so much.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
I also want to thank our Indiegogo donors for getting us to this point, our sponsors Ardbeg and Glenmorangie, and remember to think and drink responsibly. How did this cocktail, favored by these folks, get invented? It was because women like these were tired of being treated like this. So they got into bed with guys like these, who were joined by other guys seeking bigger profits, to create a constitutional amendment that created guys like these, and practically overnight turned gals like this into criminals. Want the details? Find out more on the next episode of Happy Hour History.
I bought an automobile, but I ruined the machine. For every time I started out, I drink the gasoline. But I'm on the water wagon now. I never get a jag on now. I am riding smooth and lightly. To my seat I am strapped tightly. For I'm on the water wagon now. One night I met a college chum I hadn't seen for years. We razzle-dazzled round the town and gave the college cheers. Until the sun was shining, then for home we thought we'd start. But to our great dismay, we couldn't tell ourselves apart. At last we went to his address or mine, we didn't know. We pulled the bell and waited for his wife or mine to show. And when a voice called, "Well, who's there?" we cried in accents dim, "Your husband's here, come down and see which one of us is him." I'm on the water wagon now.